All right, I'd like to call to order our January 24th Watershed Planning Commission meeting. First, we'll take a look at the agenda, and I understand there are a couple modifications to the agenda before we look for approval of that.
Madam Chair, yes. So under new business, the first three items, A, B, and C, tax program applications, they're listed as action items, but they're actually all approved. They're approved on the staff level with us not having a December meeting. So those are actually all informational items for today.
Okay.
Sorry, in addition, the last two items under new business, D and E, are information only. Those are not action items.
Okay. So all of our new business will be information. Okay, and we'll make that change. Go ahead.
Oh, I apologize. When I was formatting it, it defaulted back to actions. I apologize for that.
Oh, that's right. We got it updated there. And I have a modification to the meeting minutes. I noticed that I was marked absent, but I believe I was at that meeting and it says I called the meeting to order. So whoever needs to update that one, if we could get that updated in the minutes.
Yeah.
Any other modifications to the agenda or minutes? Okay, do we have a motion to approve the agenda and minutes with those minor changes?
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Phil. I will make that approval. Motion to approve.
And this is Commissioner Casilius. I'll second that.
I will do roll. Commissioner Weaver.
Aye.
Commissioner Pint.
Aye.
Commissioner Casilius.
Aye.
Commissioner Phil.
Aye.
Commissioner Schmidt.
Aye.
And Commissioner Bierling.
Aye.
Thank you, commissioners.
All right, that is passed. So we can move on to the election of officers for 2022. And Vanessa, you might have to help me out with how we go about this. We look for nominations first. Is that how it goes?
We do, Madam Chair. You can either nominate yourself or one of your friends here, one of your other commissioners. It is good to change it up every year or so, but obviously if you enjoy doing what you're doing or everybody feels like you're doing a great job, we can obviously continue on with the same ones that we have. And then once the nominations for chair and vice chair have been given, you simply vote.
Great, okay. How about I open it up to nominations first? Do we have any nominations for chair?
Madam Chair, this is Virgil. I don't want to put a name into a nomination yet. I just want to make a comment or two first. Clearly, no one should be forced to do something if they don't feel comfortable doing it, et cetera. And I agree there's sometimes advantages of having some roles change and new people taking leadership. That said, I think we are extremely lucky to have Rita as our chair this past year. And I've been on this committee many years and it's gone through many different chairs, and Rita is right up there at the top. So she does a really good job. So if she'd be willing, I would sure be open to nominating Rita for another term.
Right, I would be more than happy to stay on for another term if the commission votes me that way. But I'll also open it up for other nominations if anyone else would like to nominate themselves or someone else for chair.
Madam Chair, then this is Virgil again. Hearing no other nominations, I would move to nominate Rita as chair and close the nominations for chair.
And then I assume we could call for a second on that? All right, do we have a second?
Commissioner Phil, I will second that.
All right, I'll do a roll. Commissioner Weaver.
Aye.
Commissioner Pint.
Aye.
Commissioner Casilius.
Aye.
Commissioner Phil.
Aye.
Commissioner Schmidt.
Aye.
Commissioner Bierling.
Aye.
Thank you, commissioners.
All right, thanks. We will move on to nominations for, oh, sorry. Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say really quick, I apologize, Madam Chair.
Okay.
I was actually about to say what you were about to say, so.
Oh, not moving on too far here. Don't worry, I'm only moving one step. Looking for nominations for vice chair. And if I can jump in right away, I have appreciated Commissioner Pint's support over the last year or two, and just how he's been able to fill in when I haven't been available. So I would like to nominate him again if he is interested.
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Pint. I humbly would accept it, although again, somebody else would like to do it. I would be very, very happy to step aside.
I will open up to other nominations for vice chair.
I can literally hear birds chirping in the
I
background.
know.
It's beautiful.
All right, do we have a motion to nominate? No, it wouldn't be nominate, it would be to elect Commissioner Pint to vice chair and close nominations.
This is Commissioner Beerling. I'd nominate to have Mr. Pint as vice chair.
Okay, do we have a second?
Commissioner Thill, I will second that nomination.
All right,
And I'll do roll. Commissioner Weaver,
I,
Commissioner Pint,
Aye.
Commissioner Casilius,
Aye.
Commissioner Thill,
Aye.
Commissioner Schmidt,
Aye.
and Commissioner Beerling.
Aye.
Thank you, commissioners. We truly appreciate all your efforts and your opportunities you take these. So thank you.
happy to take it on for another year, so.
All those signatures and agenda items.
I know, it's not too tough. You guys make it pretty easy for us.
We try to make it easy.
Next, it looks like we do have approval of the 2022 meeting dates in the calendar. So is someone going to present that or show us what the plan is for that?
Yep. If you could, Ryan, if you could scroll, please. To the calendar. There we are. Let me zoom out a skosh. Sorry, Rita.
I know, now I'm like, but that's all right.
Blurring. I apologize. So every year, commissioners, the WPC is required to review and approve your meeting schedule for the year. Currently, the schedule is the fourth Monday of every month from 4 to 6 p.m. We have left it at that for the proposed calendar for 2022. The only difference is because the fourth Monday of December truly falls on what's a government holiday at that point, and December meetings, the WPC has not traditionally had that often. And we appreciate all your work and giving you a month off. If we can do that for you, we certainly like to do that. So the one difference this year is that we just simply would not have a meeting in December on the actual calendar. That would be the one change. Other than that, if you certainly would like to propose a different date, a different time, you have the capacity certainly to have a discussion regarding it. Otherwise, this is the calendar for this year, and if you approve it, it's what it is. And if you don't, we can certainly do what you like.
Okay, I will open it up if anyone has any comments about date time changes for just a moment. And if there are none, we will look for a motion to approve as presented.
This is Commissioner Casilius. I'm fine with the calendar as it is, and I've already, got them noted on my own personal calendar. I'm just curious, do we need to reflect on here? I don't know if in the years that I've participated so far, there's always been sort of this offsite in the fall, and we end up combining a couple months. Is that just something we decide upon at the moment, or it would need to be reflected on the official calendar?
An excellent question, Commissioner Casilius. It is something that, because it does fluctuate a little bit in the September, October months. We don't put it in the official calendar, so we usually decide that at that time. And we don't actually have a date for those this year yet. We figured that out a little bit later in the year.
No problem. I'm fine with this. I just had to ask the question, but no, I'm fine with this calendar.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve the scheduled meeting dates as presented?
This is Commissioner Casilius. I'll make a motion to approve the calendar as listed for
And do we have a second?
2022.
Thank you.
Commissioner Beerling, I'll second that.
Great.
And I'll do roll. Commissioner Weaver,
Aye.
Commissioner Pint,
Aye.
Commissioner Casilius,
Aye.
Commissioner Phil,
Aye.
Commissioner Schmidt,
Aye.
and Commissioner Beerling.
Aye.
Thank you, commissioners.
All right, the motion is passed. We'll move on to staff reports, and we're starting out with Troy.
It does not, Troy is not able to join
Oh,
this afternoon. Ryan, if you wanted to just highlight any of the bigger action items from the SWCD report, that would be great. Obviously, and in addition, the report is attached as part of the packet for your review and approval.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, so I guess I don't have a lot to touch base on here. I do know that the first graph, you see the requests and the actual projects has been coming down a bit, as you can notice from the graph itself, which is good. And so what that is actually leading to is in years past, SWCD would normally do marketing, sending letters out to landowners, targeting certain areas, and actually trying to drum up business. For the past few years, we really haven't had to do that. There's been, kind of a backload of projects, and so there hasn't been a lot of marketing. It's more or less, keeping our heads above water and trying to deal with the requests that we've got. Well, with the dip in some of the requests, there's actually the time to go out and do some of that marketing again. And so right now, the SWCD is, they've sent out mailers and they'll be following up, actually doing some door knocking and following up with each of those landowners to try to gauge their interest in some of our programs. With that being said, I also will be helping them a bit. So they're focused mostly on the Sand Creek watershed. They've got a Clean Water Fund grant that is scheduled to end this year. And so a lot of the areas they're targeting are within that watershed. The WMO also has a grant that's ending this year. It's the Watershed-Based Funding Grant from 2019. And we've dwindled those funds down quite a bit, but also we just went through an amendment process and added some funds to that. The area for that grant is actually outside of Sand Creek watershed. And so the plan is to actually have myself do some of that marketing and the door knocking outside of Sand Creek and focus on those areas to kind of help move those grant funds before it expires. So and currently that grant expires in June. We were hoping for an additional extension till the end of the year, which would make it a lot more feasible to move those. With that being said, I guess if anyone's read through this, let me know if you have any questions. Their tree and seed and plant sale did go live on January 1st. So if you were part of their mailer, you would have received an email about that. I think that based on last year, they sold out on a lot of species early. So if you do have some trees in this year, I would recommend getting your order in sooner rather than later. And I guess with that, I know it's kind of brief, but I'll stand for any questions that I can try to dive in further, or I can follow up with Troy on and get answers to.
all right, thanks. Any questions for Ryan? Hearing none, I think we can move on to the WMO. Vanessa.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. My connection's a little rough today with Zoom. I've been struggling all day. So if there's any point at which you can't hear me or you lose me, please feel free to jump around wildly or just let me know. And I do apologize. I do have a couple of updates. One of them is actually a bit larger, so I've actually moved that an ongoing agenda item. So for right now, most of you are aware that the county again is continuing on the updating and overhaul of the government center. We obviously finished the new government center west, and hopefully everybody's been in there maybe at least one point in time, if not for like licensed tabs or something like that. It's a lovely building and a good opportunity and resource area for the whole community. Meanwhile, they are working hard and heavy on redoing Government Center East, which is the building we were in before. We're currently slotted to move back at this point, possibly end of March, maybe early April. We're up on the 3rd floor. So we used to be on the 1st floor. So some of those new changes that you might see for the Water Resources Department is that we won't have a designated walk-in water resources a counter where you can kind of come back and see us all like we used to have. Up on the 3rd floor has kind of a little bit more enclosed service counter area. And then for more security reasons, they've kind of blocked off some of the public areas from the staff areas, and also to make it less confusing for residents so they don't feel like they are wandering around not knowing what they're doing. So in the future, you'll be able to find us up on the 3rd floor of the same building instead of the 1st floor. Much of the 1st floor, they've added a lot more conference rooms and areas to meet. It's always a struggle for residents and staff to be able to meet with the community because we had so many limited spaces. We'll have a lot more of those down on the 1st floor now, in addition to some of the newer rooms, obviously, in the new Government Center West. So until that time, we're still going to continue to be remote. The county is definitely still working on a virtual priority schedule just because of high COVID cases and transmission cases in the county. We're still prioritizing virtual first whenever possible. We hope at some point to shift to more in-person options. At this point, it's maybe even looking like the summer, simply because that would then correlate to when the building is more open and available for people to. So they're also doing a little bit of work too in the chair boardroom that we used to meet in, and we can still meet in that room once they finish that as well. But we also have the option of maybe doing a hybrid meeting schedule or something like that as we get closer to that. So I just wanted to give everybody kind of an update as to at least what our department and our team is looking at for, how our work situation is for us. We are fully virtual right now because we don't have permanent staffing or temporary staffing stations anymore. So in order to save money for the county, we're just working virtual until then. But when we do have our new home, we'll let you folks know and hopefully be able to send you some pictures and show you where we are and have more gatherings, soon. Every time there's a new peak of something, things change, but we keep working towards that. So that's that update.
Okay, questions for Vanessa? All right, I don't hear any and I don't see anybody unmuting, so I think we can move on. And then are you going to jump into your ongoing business, the watershed management study? Looks like you're muted.
I apologize. I muted myself. I was going to grab a sip of water and then. Anyhow. Yeah, so we're just going to jump right into the watershed management study. So, Madam Chair, Commissioners, as you recall, earlier last year, we kind of started talking about the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District, the county WMO, and the Scott SWCD working together just to determine whether or not we have opportunities to improve water resource efficiency in the county. Water resource management is kind of an interesting level of government. We follow watershed boundaries and not political boundaries. So oftentimes our boundaries, because they're the drainage shed of a lake or a river, across multiple political boundaries, and that can be kind of a unique and confusing level of government for many agencies. And then at the same time, there are obviously multiple agencies that do watershed management, just like there are multiple cities and townships. So we've been working between the three agencies to see what we can do to identify any opportunities to improve the way that we do work right now. We're all certainly high functioning agencies. That's not really what's driving this, but more just with a desire to do better. So if Ryan, if you could scroll to the next phase. So this is the phase 1 final report. The steering committee right now has received this report, and this report basically summarizes similar studies that have happened in the metro and in the state, and also identifies our baseline conditions. So that's who we are and what we do. Could scroll down a little bit, Ryan, please. So, 1 second. A little tricky. I am a little hesitant to try to share my screen because I feel I will lose you all there in trying to do that. So I'm going to try to do it this way. I'm going to see if I can line up. All right. 1 minute. Apologize. All right. So slide 4. Okay. So again, as I said, we're just simply trying to, minimize any duplication and use our resources more efficiently, certainly making it easier for citizens, many of the things I've discussed. One of the big items that was brought up by our technical committee was to try to streamline the permitting and regulatory processes. And overall, again, everything that we're doing, the outcome is to hopefully maintain or improve the resources themselves, the lakes, rivers, and wetlands. Because obviously, if nothing that we do changes that or improves that, then it's not worth doing. That's the work that we do. So slide 5, please. Thank you. For those of you who are not familiar with this map, some of you probably are, this is a 7-county metro area. This generally identifies the existing watershed management agencies and the types of watershed management agencies within the 7-county metro area. The blue ones are watershed districts. The red ones are watershed management organizations. And then the green ones are actually county-run joint power agencies, or SWMOs. So you'll notice there's actually only 3. And that's true for the entire state. There's only 3 of us in the entire state. We're very special. The one other piece I wanted to, you could go back up to 5. The one other thing I just want people to take away from this, that we were hoping folks to take away from this, is the realization that Scott County, while we are quite large, we actually have one of the fewest numbers of watershed agencies for the entire 7-county metro area. You'll notice both Washington and Hennepin have far more than we do. So there are several studies done by Washington County, the state auditor. We've done some with Scott before, Scott County, and we also did a 2012 scale study. And all of those outcomes are kind of highlighted here in the report, but I don't really want to go into the detail of that because I don't want to take all night. But if Ryan, you could go to slide 13, please. So again, just one of the key takeaways from all these previous studies is that it does take sustained political will to try to reduce or consolidate functioning watershed agencies. Obviously, when they're non-functioning, it's a little bit easier to reassign and get agencies to work together. Oftentimes, the economic conditions and budget constraints have been the drive for those studying of collaboration. So we're a little unique in that, just with the desire to do better. Keeping in mind too that Bowser and the court certainly have an instrumental role in determining any type of consolidation or governance changes. And then oftentimes these studies, regardless of what drove them initially, often lead to better collaboration and coordination between the agencies. So if you could go to slide 15, please. This is the existing county map and the different watershed agencies that are currently within the Scott County area, and then also the amount of land use and percentage that they actually take up. And then we overlaid it with just a map of all the different kinds of resources, because I think that that also tells a little bit of the story about what we do. So you'll notice that the Scott WMO is about 76% of the county, and then the Vermilion JPO is about 5% of the county. So together, those two Scott County operated watershed agencies take up a little over 80% of the county, primarily rural and urban fringe, and also primarily heavily creek. We have some very important lake resources, but we're not primarily lake as far as the types of resources we have. So we tend to balance a lot of our work between lakes and creeks to make sure that we're addressing each of our types of resources. Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District, you'll notice it's a lovely spot right there in the middle. It's about only 11% of the county, but it is a nice 42 square miles. And then up at the top, there's Lower Min. That's about 7%. And then for those of you who don't remember Black Dog WMO, it's about 1 square mile right there on the edge. If you could go to the next slide, please. So one of the things to keep in mind is that what drives watershed agencies to do what we do is often defined by statute. So the SWCD was formed in 1941 as part of the Minnesota Enabling Act of 1937, which is a supplement to Minnesota Masons statutes of 1938. They're an outcome of the Dust Bowl. It's got a really fascinating history. They do operate under Minnesota Statute 103C. They also implement Rule 8420, which is the Wetland Conservation Act. The SWMO was formed in 1996. So we're obviously the youngest of all of these. We are an outcome of MS 103B.231, which is the Metropolitan Surface Water Management Act of 1982, which basically said all of the land within the 7-county metro area must belong to a watershed management agency. So we do happen to be a function of county government, and that was because there were 4 previous smaller WMOs that were non-functioning. So Bowser actually signed those to the county. We follow MS 103B. We do have the option to choose whether or not we follow 103D, which is for watershed districts. It's nice, we do have an option. We also do follow Administrative Rule 8410. So you'll see that a lot in our annual planning and administrative reports. Fire Lake Spring Lake Watershed District has another really great history. They were formed in 1970 by petition under the 1955 Minnesota Watershed Act. So this was the traditional reason why watershed districts were formed in the first place. This was prior to the Metro Surface Water Management Act. So all watershed districts in the state of Minnesota operate under the 1955 Watershed Act. And they did have to be formed by petition. So they were here a long time ago. They operate under Minnesota Statute 103D. And they also do follow some of MS 103B and some of 8410 as well. Another way to look at it, what I try to explain to folks, all watershed districts are WMOs, but not all WMOs are WDs. Next slide, please. I will not go into too much detail on this slide, but it is a very thorough slide. Again, this slide really identifies the difference between WMOs, WDs, and SWCDs. The first section is what are called mandated programs. So these are things that are literally identified in statute that we must do. And then below that are programs that we can choose to do or that we are required to do through our adopted plan. So again, if we identify it in our plan as something we are going to do, we are then required to do it. But if we put in our plan that Another agency will be taking care of that item. It's still approved in our plan, but then that other agency can do it and we don't have to. One of the things that we do, for example, is AIS. We do some AIS, but then we utilize the county's resource to implement some of that. So that's just one good example. One thing you will notice is that there are a lot of similarities, but there are also a lot of differences. The watershed districts have more mandated requirements and the WMOs tend to have more flexible requirements. A lot of that comes from the fact that we're a bit newer, and when WMOs were formed, I think agencies realized that there were other jurisdictions within the metro, like cities and townships and counties that were already doing required water resource work, and they were trying to fill in the gaps. And then there's the SWCDs. They do a lot of really unique work as well. They do the buffer law and disaster recovery assistance. They do a lot of work between the education and outreach and water quality monitoring. They do a lot of the tax program work that we help partner with them to do. So they're a little bit unique, but you can see there's a lot of similarities too. Anyway, next slide, please. This was pretty interesting for me. The priorities are pretty unique for our three agencies. In all my years, I've never seen two adjoining WMOs that had such different priorities. And that's not a bad thing at all. It comes out from a very rigorous citizen input process and issue identification assessment. So it's based upon the resource needs and our residents. So the fact that they are very different simply speaks to the land that we're responsible for. But in this case, those priorities, goals, strategies, and policies are driven by those issues within each jurisdiction and their residents. So there are some commonalities, certainly, but there are no two lakes, rivers, and wetlands that face the same exact set of circumstances. Some tend to have a really rural drainage area. Some have a really urban drainage area. Some are on clay, some are on sand. You know, it's all very different from resource to resource. And then resident type to resident type. So those priorities, goals, strategies, and policies are what also drive our budget decisions. And you'll see that later on in the report. You'll notice that when you see differences in our budgets, it very clearly reflects our priorities that are identified in our plans as our agency is. And then that's supported by the board and is driven by our citizens, which many of you have been an influential part of. So it's nice to have you here. So then once included an approved watershed management plan or an SWC comprehensive plan, just keep in mind that those programs and activities do become required, and we are evaluated on those annually by the Board of Water and Soil Resources. Really quick, for those of you who remember or don't remember, the SWMO priorities in our current plan are to protect human health and safety, the protection and prevention over restoration, improve underlying factors, and implementation preferred to postponing for additional study and planning. The watershed district's priorities are water quality, aquatic invasive species, and reduce flooding. And then the SWCD priorities, I think they're really good. They do a good job here of filling in the gaps. They promote and support individual actions for water quality and soil health, support the county and local watershed partners, and they assist residents with regulatory requirements. And then they're, of course, countywide source of conservation information and technical assistance. All right, so if you could jump down to revenue sources, which is slide 20, please. This is just a real quick summary of how we get our revenues. In this case, both the SWMO and SWCD use a county levy. We both use the same type of county levy. And so we're not different in that respect. The SWCD does not do a levy. They don't have a levy. So they are dependent upon grants and partners to provide all of their funding. That's kind of the biggest piece you'll see here. The only other one that would kind of help lean more information into that is that the SWCD also allows they do charge a fee for some of their services. The Watershed District does charge a fee for some of their services. The SWMO, we don't charge any fees for any services. We do have the option to. And then you could scroll down to 21. So the next several slides actually summarize kind of the different program areas and our revenue. So it digs in deep to our budget. It was actually quite a struggle. You would think that even though we all have, something called a monitoring program, what we might put in that monitoring program can be very different. Planning is another one where you'll see we put different things in planning, and so they get paid for very differently. So it was actually not quite an apples to apples. It was quite a lot of work, and so I think working with both Troy and Joni was really rewarding and enjoyable, but sometimes very challenging for us, certainly. So you'll notice that as we break down each of these graphs, you'll see that our levy is generally identified in that blue color. You'll notice our grants are in the kind of golden color, and then you'll see what we have as other. So for us, some of that other are usually come from our partners. So from like the O'Dowd Lake Association to help pay for some of the lake treatments, or if we're doing a joint project with one of the cities, we might be the manager and then they'll pay us for some of that. The SWCD is a little different. You'll notice that their budget, when they give it broken down, you'll see that which parts of their budget actually are coming from our partners, from us or the Watershed District, so that you don't get confused that there's a duplicity there. This is actually for all of these slides. It is the 2018, 19, and 20 budget years. It's just 3-year averages. So it also depended a little bit upon what we were doing those 3 years, but it's still a good snapshot overall of the work that we do. And if you could scroll down just to slide 22. So again, these are all the common programs that you will see that we each have, but what we do with each program depends a lot upon what's in our plan and a little bit on what we're required to do under statute. If you could, next slide, please. Our capital improvement program, we each have a capital improvement program. We each do quite a lot of capital improvement projects. These are the largest projects that we do. These are not tax or cost share projects. They tend to be high cost, but high benefit. They tend to require several years of funding build up in order to pay for. These are the ones with the longer lifespan. And then the ownership of these is almost always on private land, but not always. And then we typically fund these by multiple sources, levy, grants, bonds, special assessments, because of the size. Some of the CIP projects that you are familiar with, obviously the Quarry Creek Ravine Stabilization, Sand Creek Bluff Stabilization, McMahon and Markley Lake Outlet projects, which we're working on right now, wetland restorations, etc. Prior Lake, Spring Lake Watershed District, some of their great CIP projects include the Lake Alum treatments, the Sutton Lake Outlet, the P-Lock channel restoration work, and the wetland bridge and cart barrier. And then the SWCD does a little bit fewer of these, only because they're a bit more constrained in needing partners to help levy some of that budget, leverage some of that budget. But again, the Helena Wetland Bank has been an amazing project, and then other ones that they've done as well. So next slide, please. So you can see again, the capital improvement program costs are based upon a reflection of our budget again. For the WMO, you'll notice that it's all project costs because our staff time is in a different program area. So that all comes into project management. So Prior Lake, Spring Lake Watershed District, and SWCD are all on here as well. Next slide, please. Education and outreach. A heavy portion of education outreach is the Scott Clean Water Education Partnership, which was started in 2010. And it is a collaborative effort between multiple agencies, not just the 3. But the WMO does leverage about 90% of that budget. So overall, we certainly contribute a good portion of it, and everybody benefits and everybody enjoys the program. So we're really excited about continuing that and moving forward with that. So again, you can see the education and outreach program costs per agency. You'll notice we have some of these areas that look like kind of a blue hash area. So those are the parts of our budget that are actually going to the SWCD. So we have dedicated funds that we put in our budget, and those go to the SWC. In this case, for education and outreach, it's to help implement the SWET program. Right. And then the invasive species program. We each have a very active invasive species program. For us and the Watershed District, we address aquatic invasive species. The SWCD actually does also terrestrial invasive species, like their wild parsnip program, which I actually used those flyers this year. Those are really great. The county does actually coordinate the county AIS program, and that's because the state allocates funding for AIS implementation to the counties. And then the counties determine how to allocate that funding from that point. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to take funding and then try to pass it to ourselves just to do the same thing. It's just more administrative work for the same effort. So we leave that at the county and we implement it through that. So that's a good opportunity that we have available to us. So the work is getting done, it's just getting done through a different partner. And then we also do work with the Watershed District and the other agencies for things like boat launch inspections and things like that. And then we work to fill in gaps. So invasive species program. So you notice again, the different funding for each agency is based, the different budgets for each agency, again, really reflects those agency partnerships, agency priorities that we identified early on in the presentation and report. Next slide, please. Inventory and assessment. Again, for us, inventory and assessment is specifically sub-watershed assessments, flood mitigation studies. These are the kind of the studies and assessing the existing conditions. Prior Lake Spring Lake is currently working on the upper watershed blueprint. We've done the Sand Creek geomorphic study. And these are generally things that are necessary precursors towards capital projects and programs. So you need to be able to provide the data in order to get the funding in, know where to prioritize some of those practices. Next one. This tends to be a little bit more similar in funding simply because the amount of inventory and assessment is very land-based. So regardless of what the agency is there, that's generally going to reflect how much inventory and assessment is needed. So monitoring. So again, we each have a pretty rigorous monitoring program, but our monitoring programs reflect just different types of monitoring that we do in different prioritizations of monitoring, and then different types of monitoring. You can just scroll to monitoring costs. Monitoring, again, we both us and the Watershed District provide funds to the SWCD to make sure that a lot of that monitoring is getting done countywide, and so that we can spread that work out among staff. Operation and maintenance. Something to keep in mind with operation and maintenance, it's a program that we started growing a little bit more. It's important because this is, for us at the WMO, it's limited to capital projects that are SWMO installed. Now the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District also has the ferric chloride building, as well as ferric chloride sampling, and they also have a demonstration site and maintenance. That's one good way I see that there are definitely differences between the agencies, but they're both different types of operations and maintenance. So next slide, please. And then next slide. All right, planning. For us, we identify planning just kind of based upon the definition and statute, what we're required to do. So it's pretty limited to approved planning activities, which are the 10-year watershed plan update, as well as reviewing and approving and coordinating with local plans from municipalities and townships. And then if we have any other approved planning activities, such as the One Watershed One Plan planning activity, because the outcome of that is a plan that's been approved to pursue by the county, that gets put into planning. It also includes TMDL studies or plans as those come through, any other state or regional planning efforts that result in a comprehensive planning effort, we put under planning. And then if you could move forward, please. This is one, I apologize, I should know this. it just left me, Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District does put a few other things in their planning. It's neither right nor wrong. It's just how they divided their budget. But that one is definitely reflected in the different costs. So regulation. So this is the making sure that any standards or rules are being adhered to. A lot of this involves site visits and compliance. So for the WMO does not do too much of this because we as a WMO simply adopt performance standards. That's what's required for us. And those standards are actually reflected by municipalities and townships and LGUs that then incorporate them into their ordinances or performance standards. So we ourselves do not have rules. Watershed districts, on the other hand, are required to adopt rules, and they can delegate the permitting process to a municipality if they adopt equivalent rules. So there's an equivalency factor. So from a statutory perspective, there's more requirements on a watershed district to regulate, less on a WMO. I suspect that has a little bit to do with the Metro Surface Water Management Act, but you know, after doing a lot of research, I can't say with 100% definity that that is true. That's just what appears to be from the literature, kind of what came about. So it's good to keep in mind that we're both water resource agencies, but in this case, there is a little bit different between what we are required to do and what we can do by choice. Next one. Regulation costs. Again, it's a reflection of our requirements and our budget priorities. The SWCD is very high simply because the SWCD actually implements the county's regulatory program for their MS4 permit. So next. Technical assistant cost share program. Obviously, you know, this is a high priority for the county and the SWMO. We do a lot of work with our technical assistant and cost share program. It's to promote that voluntary stewardship, et cetera, et cetera. And scroll down. You'll notice again, so it's reflected in the budgets that cost share is a high priority and it fits with the priorities of the WMO. The SWC does a lot of the implementation, so you see it there. Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District doesn't have a technical assistant cost share program as a high priority identified in their plan by their constituents. So obviously you don't see it as highly reflected in their budgets. Scroll down. There are a few unique programs that no matter how we tried to reorganize our budgets, we just couldn't get them to fit. We have what's called a coordination program. It's meeting with different agencies on maybe some projects or activities that they want to do that aren't in an identifiable plan, that don't fit under kind of that statutory description of what is a planning effort. Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District has their farmer-led council, and a heavy part of their unique program, their activity is actually operating that Prior Lake outlet channel, that PLOC. SWCD has a whole host of wonderful, unique programs and activities that only they do, but they all benefit everybody in the county. Next one, please. And then obviously you can see that reflected in the budgets. Administration and overhead, this is the base operational costs, basically keeping the light on. It's staffing, leave, training, facilities, IT, etc. Those non-personnel expenses. Next page. So administration overhead costs. A lot of that is similar from agency to agency, regardless of the size of the agency. You need to have somebody to help to coordinate boards. You need to have staff. You need to have leave. You need to have training. You need to have spaces to sit, you know, heat, light, air, those types of basic administrative costs. It is a rather small percentage of our budgets overall when you look at it. I think we'd like to think people might like to think it's pretty high. It was pretty surprising to me that when we broke it all down, administration overhead costs are actually overall, I mean, you'll notice it's you know, maybe about $100,000 of our you know, $1.6 million budget. So it's actually a pretty small percentage of our budget overall. But it is necessary. So scroll down, please. Again, this just kind of just identifies what are those personnel costs. Page down. The one differentiation is that the WMO doesn't necessarily break down all of our administrative costs by program activity. So all of our leave for all of our staff simply comes out of administration, for example, whereas the Watershed District, they might divvy that up into a certain program area like monitoring and break it down. And so it's very, very close. We did our absolute best. And I think it's still a clear representation, but there are differences. There's neither right nor wrong, just slightly different ways of doing things. And then staffing, this one did drive a few questions from the steering committee and the technical assistance team. The administration, and you can see this is divided, we divided this FTEs by common program areas. You'll notice that, the SWMO has 2.66 FTEs, the Watershed District has 6.35, and the SWCD has 12.25. Again, this is how much time we spend in each of these different categories. So our total actually reflects the fact that a portion of our staff is shared with the County Natural Resources Department. As you guys know, we all wear two hats, and we also administrate county programs as well. So next page, please. So we created a new slide because folks did not know or weren't familiar with the County Natural Resources Program and Department, and it is its own budget. It's a very separate budget from the WMO. I think the big piece on this one is that people should know that the WMO receives no dedicated funding from the county general levy. Our funding comes entirely from the SWMO, which is a separate levy, bonds, grants, etc. We do not receive funding from the county general levy, and vice versa. The SWMO does not give money to the county general levy or county levy programs. The efficiency is simply by the ability for us to save time and staff and doing some of our program work. So many activities might require a county staff person to be there as well as a WMO staff to be there. A Met Council planning activity, for example. In that instance, I can show up as representing both agencies. It saves time. So that's one example. Planning review is another one. A lot of times they don't need to reach out to the WMO if there's a standards question and a standards interpretation question, because Megan Tasca is just so familiar with both because she's wearing two hats. So most importantly, the County Natural Resources Department is under Planning and Natural Resources. My position serves as well as the Natural Resources Administrator. On average, it's about $100,000 of budget that we manage through the County Natural Resources budget program. So it's not a ton of money or anything, it's just there. It comes to the equivalent of about a 0.44 FTE, which is the average salary building from 2018 to 2020. And so you'll notice when you put that 2.6 from the previous slide plus the 2.44, you end up with slightly over 3 FTEs, which is what we have, 3 FTEs. Not a big surprise, but the math does add up and that's good. So some of the main services include things like complaint response, administering the county's MS4 permit program, FEMA administration. You'll notice these are all things the SWMO does not do and is not mandated to do, but county water resources departments are, just like city water resources departments are. That's where we administer, again, that natural resources block grant, ordinances, and aquatic invasive species. So next page. The last couple slides are simply some summary slides. This is an expenses summary. So if you put it all together at 100%, this is how our budgets break down. Next page. Again, it's just another way to look at it. Where do you know overall, how are we spending most of our money? Where are we dedicating most of our budgets based upon each of those program areas? Key takeaways. I guess some of the key takeaways that I would simply bring up is that our budgets really strongly reflect our priorities that are identified in our plans and reflected by our citizens and our issues in our resources. So while we are similar agencies, we do tend to be quite different in those respects. That doesn't mean that there's not some great opportunities to collaborate better, and that's our next step, is we're going to start working on, or what we are working on now is identifying opportunities to improve efficiencies now that we know what those existing issues are and our existing conditions are. So if you just scroll, there's some more key takeaways. So at that point, if you're all still awake, and hopefully you're all here, thank you for your time, and I stand for any questions.
Vanessa?
Yeah, Bruce.
Bruce, say, I have to leave here, so I would just want to give one quick comment. We did review
Please.
this at our January 11th Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District Board meeting, and everybody was very impressed by the amount of work that staff put into this. It's a great report, a lot of good information. There was a slide on the steering committee, or what's the next step. We all voted to go to the next step. So just for that information for your board members and yourselves. So, but it was a very good report. We thought that we want to get to a point where we can say, what do we get out of this report? What should we conclude? So anyway, I have to leave. It's my daughter's birthday, and I'm sorry to leave. It was a very good report though.
Well, thank you so much, Bruce, for sharing and for providing us some input and feedback from your board.
Yeah.
Certainly it's been a worthwhile endeavor, and wish your daughter a happy birthday.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the meeting.
You too.
Other questions or comments for Vanessa? Okay, well, I appreciate the thorough overview of all this information, Vanessa. So,
Madam Chair, this is Virgil. The silence is nothing to do with reflection of that. We're very impressed with the presentation. Excellent job. I'm sure all of the commissioners feel the same way. We don't have any questions because you did such a nice job presenting it. And clearly we're going to take some time and digest to get a little more detail at our leisure. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Pitt. Yes, I understand. It is a lot of information. So please feel free to reach out to me at any point in time. I'm happy to talk with you over the phone or do a little virtual meeting, and we can go over different questions or thoughts that you have. So any thoughts or suggestions you have, questions you have are very welcome feedback, and we'll always approve the work that we're doing. So please feel free to reach out. Love to hear from you. And thank you very much.
okay, with that, I think we can move on to Ryan's program updates, the tax video.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, so the tax video, if you remember from the November meeting, we tried to play that video, and we really haven't had luck playing videos through this formatting. So to give you kind of an update, I did ask for comments at that meeting and did receive some. So it was great. There was a number of commissioners that reached out, and then also staff too that watched the video for the first time. So some great comments. The video was updated, and Dominique is actually going to be posting it on our website. So I would think within the next few days, that video will be up there and updated. So I just wanted to give an update on that. We're also working on the service agreement with the SWCD. We're hoping that it can cover 2022 and 23, just to, that way we don't have to go through the contracting process again. So hopefully we'll get that processed here and executed in the next month or two. This is also a big time of the year for reporting. So a lot of our grants, Bowser's reporting deadline is always February 1st. So that's obviously coming up fairly quickly. And then our EPA grant, we report quarterly, and that was executed in Q4 of 2021. So this will mark our first reporting period for that new EPA grant. So staff is kind of, I know Melissa's working on her grants, and then there's some grants too that I've got that I'm working on. So in the next week and a half, we'll have all that done for the 2021 season. And then last thing I mentioned, it was that I'm helping out with the door knocking with the SWCD. So I covered that during the the SWCD updates or the staff reports. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ryan. Any questions for Ryan? Okay, I think we can move on to Melissa with her program updates.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several updates for you. So typically at the end of each year, we meet with the DNR and the Cedar Lake District. I'm sorry. That was a strange sound. Did everybody else hear that?
Yeah, that might have been like a phone vibrating is my guess.
Okay. So we meet at the end of the year with the DNR and the Cedar Lake Improvement District to go over the treatment season and how it went. And so the three of us met on January 10th regarding the 2021 treatment season. There were great questions brought up by the LID and good discussion with the DNR. The DNR has agreed to renew the Cedar Lake vegetation management plan. So I'm waiting to receive that, which will then also need to be signed by the Lake Improvement District. And that allows us then to continue with larger treatments on cedar. They're also open to using more than one type of herbicide, depending on the curly leaf distribution, to get the most effective treatment at the best cost, because endothol seems to be or seems to give the best results, which we've used for many years, with the exception of the last 3 years. We use something else, but it's also the most expensive, especially when we use it lake-wide. So the survey report for cedar is now on our website, on the WMO portion of the Scott County website, under reports and documents, and under aquatic vegetation and invasive species reports. So, and then they also agreed, after we were done with that meeting, to renew the McMahon Lake treatment variance as well, because McMahon Lake is a natural environment lake, and we have to get a variance from the DNR to do any kind of herbicide treatment on that. Speaking of the curly leaf treatments, our 3-year contract with PLM was up in 2021. So I put together and sent out a request for proposals last week on January 20th for curly leaf management on Cedar, McMahon, O'Dowd, and Thole. And I sent those all out to a list of commercial applicators that I found on the DNR website. I think there was about 12 or 13, I think, that we sent them to. So I have representatives from Cedar, O'Dowd, and Thole that will be reviewing those proposals with me as they come in. The deadline for the proposal is February 7th. The contract will be written again for 3 years. It just makes things a lot easier to get going right away in the season, to whoever we choose for a contractor. Since the treatments occur in May of each year, I want to get the contracts uploaded as quickly as possible after the review process. So I'm setting up review meetings with all those lakes so that we can get them reviewed and make a decision to get the contract uploaded as soon as possible. I just received notification from the DNR that their 2022 Aquatic Invasive Species Control Grant application process is now available. The application deadline for control grants is Monday, February 21st. And they made a change again this year to the grant process, that all on-time applications by February 21st will be considered for funding. So the application review will not be on a first come first serve basis like it has been in the past, which is good, because I used to, as soon as I got that email, I used to drop everything I was doing and quickly fill out the application and get the permit submitted. So consideration of grant applications no longer hinges on the order of applications received as it did years ago. So that's a good thing. There is $1.25 million available to fund projects and to help manage invasive species. What is new with that is how that $1.25 million will be allocated. 850,000 of it is allocated to a special one-time funds specifically for lake associations. That does not include lake improvement districts. It's specifically for lake associations. That was decided in a legislative special session. With those one-time funds, there'll be two categories: your traditional control money, and then a new infestations or innovative grant control funds. So if there is a lake association that maybe has a new invasive species and wants to apply for money for that, or if they want to try a different control method, there are companies out there that will actually, instead of using a chemical, they'll either cut the invasive species and harvest it, or they pull it. They go in scuba gear under the water and pull the invasive species. It's quite expensive. I have looked into that. And then the other 400,000 is in regular program funds for other organizations such as local government units and lake improvement districts. So there is a limited amount of funds for LGUs to apply for, and a lot more funds for specifically for lake associations to apply for. And for this year only, a lake association that will be applying can also propose a second year of treatment. So they could apply for 2 years of grant funds if they want, this year only. If they are awarded grant funds for 2022 and 2023, when 2023 control grant announcement comes around, they can't apply for additional funds in 2023. And then they're only accepting one application per water body. So lake associations or LGUs can't apply for more than one grant type for a particular water body. So that's that. I did speak with O'Dowd. I spoke with Commissioner Veerling, who leads the Thole Lake treatments, and with Jerry Neville, who is my contact for O'Dowd Lake. And the O'Dowd Lake Chain Association is open to applying as the lake association for those lakes. And then I, as the county or the WMO, and Vanessa, because that has changed also. It has to be somebody who has the authority to sign contracts, has to apply for the traditional grant funds. So Vanessa will be applying for those when we have time to do that.
To be clear, Melissa does all the work and she makes me sign. I feel horrible. But it's what the requirement is, and all the credit goes to Melissa for that.
Moving on to the McMahon Outlet Project. The DNR contract is still under review by the county attorney. The engineering contract is uploaded for the contract review process. We hope to have both contracts brought to the March 1st county board meeting, but we'll see how that goes. I did create a task completion timeline or a Gantt chart for the entire project. With the delay in approvals of contracts to date, our expected construction of the outlet itself is we're now looking at winter of 2023. The good news is the establishment of the McMahon Lake Improvement District has been moving forward. There was a couple of lake residents who have stepped up and really got things moving. They created a landowner information packet. They have 16 of 20 signatures on a petition to the county board for the formation of the lid. Minnesota rule only requires 25% of the candidate properties for signatures on the petition. So they got quite a few, which is really good. That petition was hand delivered to Brad Davis on January 20th. The setting of the public hearing for the formation of the lid will be at the February 1st county board meeting, with the public hearing being scheduled for February 15th for the county board. So we're glad to hear that that's moving forward. And my last update is a new study that we're partnering with the city of Prior Lake that's titled the Campbell Lake Regional Stormwater Assessment. So we're partnering with the city of Prior Lake on a study of the Campbell Lake watershed, which is also the headwaters of Pika Creek. And some of you may have remembered we did several capital improvement projects in the Pika Creek corridor. So this study will guide future development to ensure that stormwater management meets or exceeds all of the local and state standards while protecting existing downstream best management practices and future best management practices. So the study will identify and prioritize water quality improvement BMPs and locations for regional stormwater management within the Campbell Lake watershed. Study deliverables will include concept level BMP designs, estimated BMP water quality benefits, preliminary cost estimates, and a cost benefit analysis for prioritized BMPs. It does include establishing a technical advisory committee, which will be formed to include the WMO, the city, and Spring Lake Township. The city of Prior Lake will lead the study, and they'll manage an engineering consultant who will be working on the assessment. The city received 2021 watershed-based funding for this assessment, and the WMO is providing some match funds to it. And that's all I have. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Melissa. The one thing I would reiterate to the watershed-based implementation funding program through Bowser now allows us to have partners that can directly receive funds. So previously, clean water funds had to come directly from us, and then we had to do all of the administration. So that was obviously very time consuming, but obviously always worth it in the long run. The newer Bowser programs allow us to still partner and get the same projects in the ground, but we don't always have to be the administrator. We can simply be a partner. So this is one where in the last round of watershed-based implementation funding, the city was between us and the city, we decided the city would make a great lead on this one. Also to show other agencies and cities can actually do these great projects as a grantee themselves. And we are the partners. So we're getting all of the benefits without having to do the administrative cost. It is still identified in our watershed plan. That's still one of the requirements of the program. So I think it's one of the best new benefits of the clean water funding programs that Bowser has come up with. And so I really enjoy it, and we're looking forward to it.
Melissa, I can't picture where Campbell Lake is. Could somebody throw up a map and show me where that?
I didn't know where it was either originally, Commissioner Weaver. If that helped.
And I can picture Pika Creek, but I can't think of where the headwaters would be. So just curious.
One other unique benefit is they're looking to identify some areas of potential regional stormwater management, so that to help also guide development, so that some of that stormwater infrastructure is in place for the area as it comes through, which does help sometimes ease the burden on developers or residents as they want to change the type of land use. They can, in a very, very simplified form, kind of plug into an existing system, much like you plug into sewer and water, rather than having to build it yourselves. So
Also, Madam Chair and
Okay.
Commissioners, Campbell Lake, yeah, it's right here, just northwest of Spring Lake.
Okay.
So it's one of the developing fringe areas of the city.
Mhm.
They're seeing that growth coming towards that area. And so they're just getting, they just want to get ahead of the curve, obviously.
Mhm. Great. Any other questions for Melissa or Vanessa? Okay, I think we can move on. And up next is actually Commissioner Pint, and I attended the One Watershed, One Plan kickoff meeting. Commissioner Pint, would you like to go first and talk about that? Otherwise, I can too.
Well, okay, yeah, Madam Chair, I will just say that it was a very good informal, informational meeting. And I think the county and Watershed Planning Commission will be well served to have Rita taking the lead on this one, because she's much more knowledgeable with some of these things than I am. But we'll have a good working team, and we'll be giving you updates as we go on. So right now, we're just had our very first meeting. So Rita, why don't you go ahead and pick it up from there?
Sure. Yep. I'll just add that at the kickoff meeting, we just met different members that would be involved in the planning. They explained a little bit how the agencies work versus the actual representatives that can vote versus other people who can provide input. Right now, they are working on hiring a consultant. And my understanding is that they are going to narrow it down and put out the request for proposals for a consultant and then bring that back to the planning committee in February. So we'll have our next meeting in February. And Commissioner Pint and I met with Vanessa in between meetings and after that meeting just to see level of updates we'd want to provide. And it seemed like a good idea just to have a standing agenda item during these meetings so we could provide these updates and just let everyone know how it's going, along with periodically attending the county meetings to let them know how things are going too. So that's the plan for now. Otherwise, I think that was about it. There wasn't much. We just kind of talked about the process mostly at that meeting. And for those that don't know, it's a long process. So it'll be kind of years in the making here to get this plan wrapped up. Hopefully not years and years, but sometimes it takes that long. But we'll just continue to plug away, I guess, and provide updates as there's information. So I'll open it up to question, or Commissioner Pint, would you like to add any more?
No, the only thing I'd suggest is that maybe, again, either you or Vanessa could give an update again in terms of the One Watershed, One Plan that really incorporates kind of what geographical area and what we're trying to do here. So give a little more background if that'd be great.
Yeah, do you have a map handy, Vanessa? Or can think of one offhand?
Give me 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. All right, and can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
So this is the Lower Minnesota River Watershed One planning boundary that was initially identified by Bowser. And then what we actually moved forward with as a planning area is what you see here in blue. So it no longer includes the area in pink. There wasn't enough, I think, interest in these other agencies between all of their other planning activities. And they obviously have access to the watershed-based implementation funding, clean water funds. So they didn't really see necessarily an overwhelming benefit to participating in this activity. So while we do certainly have access to the watershed-based implementation funding, which is closer to like $800,000, whereas this is about $200,000, there are several benefits to this. Is there are a lot of agencies, as we're talking through the watershed management study, that do similar water resource management work, but it's very difficult actually to sometimes partner across agencies when you're talking about prioritizing funding and implementation practices. So the benefit of the One Watershed, One Plan planning process allows us to streamline those areas where we have similar priorities across these jurisdictional boundaries in a much more simplified fashion, and allows us to, for example, better prioritize and dedicate fundings to the upstream headwaters here of Sand Creek, which, as you guys know, obviously, if we were limited to just what was in the WMO or the county, it really limits our ability to improve and protect the Sand Creek area. So for us, being able to work in the other two counties is a real benefit to us. For them, the benefit is obviously that, you know, they have access to clean water funds to help improve those resources as well. Previously, you know, we had this very well done, but it's also very challenging process of trying to work across borders and dedicate funding and sending funding, and a lot of agreement, a lot of administrative time, and we don't always have the ability. A lot of rules in place that don't always necessarily allow us to share funds the way we'd like to work on joint projects. And then the other thing too is it allows us to identify as a group what those shared priorities are and what those shared planning goals are. So it really will help us be far more efficient and streamlined and work cohesively on a larger scale for this area. It is not meant to supplement our local watershed plan. We would never want it to do that. But it does allow us to leverage more resources and partnerships in a much quicker and more efficient manner than we have been able to do previously. How was that?
That was a terrific overview. Thank you.
Just a real quick summary too for Virgil. As you mentioned, the agencies that are currently involved are Rice County and LeSueur County and the SWCDs, Scott County and the SWCD, as far as the policy committee is that Rita and Virgil are representing. Lower Minnesota River Watershed District is also on that policy or steering committee team. Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District wanted to take a little bit more secondary role as kind of a technical advisory team, so they'll be there. For our perspective, Rita and Virgil are actually representing the county and SWMO with the other steering committee members. So they're helping to kind of guide this, and then they report to the board, who is the decision-making body, obviously, for the county.
Any questions on that? Okay, I think we can move into new business. Looks like Ryan, you're up first.
Chair, Commissioners, so these were the items that were listed as action and now are just informational. Without the December meeting, some of these are using actually 2021 funds, so we wanted to approve them on a staff level, while we still have the ability to use those funds. So I'll start off with the first one is John Sacco. It's a shoreline protection application. So this project is located in Helena Township and is along Cedar Lake. So this situation, there was existing riprap that was providing stabilization along the shoreline, but it needed to be addressed. So it's starting to kind of succumb to the elements. And so what the plan is to actually pull back the slope and add new riprap and then do a native upland planting to kind of stabilize the bank. So the project total funds are $11,310. The proposed amount from the WMO is $7,917, and the landowners would be then kicking in $3,393. The proposed funding source is the 2021 local general fund and our new EPA grant. So this is one of our first projects we were able to use those funds on. As per the docket, all shoreline projects go through the screening committee for recommendation and review. And the SWCD did recommend approval at their December 21st meeting. So with that, I'll stand for any questions on the John Sacco shoreline project.
Questions for Ryan? Okay, let's move to the next one.
Okay, next one is Michael Saxton. So he recently purchased a property along 169 between Jordan and Shakopee. So it's located in Sand Creek Township. And what the project is a wetland restoration. And so this wetland was previously drained by tile, and through aerial reconnaissance of the photos, it possibly was ditched at one point. So Andy at the SWCD was the technical representative, and it sounds like it wasn't super definitive, but it's possible that it was also ditched. So the plan is to then remove that drain tile and then install a berm to restore that wetland. And then also that would restore 1.3 acres. And if you remember, for our docket, any wetland restoration is for 15 years. So normally our contracts are 10 years, but wetlands are 15. This project would prevent sediment nutrients from entering Sand Creek, and the estimated cost is $9,295, and the proposed amounts are $5,265 from the WMO. And the SWCD is also contributing $3,627 through their Clean Water Fund, and then the landowners themselves will contribute $403. Excuse me. Then the proposed funding source was once again the 2021 local general fund, which had sufficient projects. Once again, similar to shoreline protection, wetland restorations are identified as needing to go through the screening committee for review and recommendation. This one was also reviewed at the SWCD December 21st meeting and was recommended for approval. And I'll stand for any questions on the Michael Saxton wetland restoration project.
Thanks, Ryan. Any questions for Ryan on that one? Hearing none, let's move on.
Last one of the tax projects. So this is a project for Stonehouse Farm LLC, and it's a grass waterway. The landowner's name is David Wheaton. He has a property in Sand Creek Township. And what was going on here is there's been sort of an erosive area of the field that the renter's been trying to address since 2014. He's tried no-till and cover crops, but this gully in the field continues to grow in size. So a 400-foot grass waterway is being proposed to reduce that erosion. This project drains to Porter Creek, and the estimated cost is $6,710. The proposed amount for the WMO is $2,684. The same amount would also be coming from the SWCD through their state cost share funds. And then the landowners would also contribute $1,342. The proposed funding source is once again the 2021 local general fund, along with those SWCD state cost share funds. As per the docket, this project does exceed the $100 per ton of sediment and requires then a screening committee recommendation. Once again, the SWCD did recommend approval at their December 21st meeting. A couple things to note. So we did have sufficient funds for this project. And so, you know, in an effort, we tried to use those funds and utilize them for projects. And even though this one did come in higher, you know, it was one we were waiting to the end of the year to kind of make that decision on whether to go forward with it or not. So with that, I'll stand for any questions on the Stonehouse Farm Grass Waterway project.
Any questions? Great. All right. Thanks, Ryan. Let's move on to Melissa's updates or her new business. Excuse me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am going to share my screen here. Okay, so Vanessa asked me to put together, give you an update on the temperature and precipitation data and kind of what we've been seeing over the last decade, or actually a couple decades, as I'll show you here. You know, we've been experiencing more extreme climate events. I don't know if any of you have noticed, but overall Minnesota is becoming a warmer and wetter. And I'll show you some of the data that supports that. But typically on average, the Twin Cities area, the average precipitation is about 31.6 inches per year, and average snowfall is about 51.2 inches per year. And what I'm showing right now is the DNR's State Climatology Office website, and they have some really good tools on here to analyze and manipulate the data to show you some really good trends. And we are fortunate to have precipitation and temperature data going back to 1895. So we have 126 years of temperature and precip data that we can look at. And this site kind of will show us a trend that we're seeing in this data. So I'm going to, we can actually search by county. So I've got Scott County chosen here, and we'll do average temperature data first. And I'm going to search all of the 126 years of data. And we'll just go through December of 2021 for now. But if we plot this out, you know, you'll see quite a variation in the data, but you can add a trend line for these years. And when we look at this, it's pretty evident that that's at an increasing incline. And it actually figures it out for you here. So we're seeing an average temperature increase per decade of 0.18 degrees Fahrenheit, just for Scott County. If we switch this to precipitation, and plot that, we can again see an increasing trend line of about almost 0.4 inches of increased precipitation per decade in Scott County alone. I think all of you can remember those extreme events of 2014, which caused millions of dollars damage in Scott County alone, and all the damage it did in Blakely Township into the road. So we're definitely seeing more extreme events. And can you see that I switched tabs? Does that work? Okay, good. So I thought this was really interesting also. This is using all the past climate data as well. This is an animated depiction of how temperature has changed, and this is going to show throughout the entire state, and it'll go in 30-year increments. And at the end, it'll show you a line of where temperature change used to be in 1924 versus it goes to 2018. It doesn't go through 2021. But I wanted to explain that ahead of time, because once I click this, it starts on its own and I can't pause it. So this is average annual temperature. Obviously, the warmer colors are warmer temperatures and the cooler colors are cooler temperature, but you'll see it's kind of split back in the early 1900s, but you'll see how this changes. And if you notice how the warmer temperatures are creeping further north in Minnesota. So where that warm line used to be in 1924, all of this area of Minnesota has now become warmer. Oh, sorry, I should have placed this here. Scott County is about right here where this little. So now let's look at total precipitation. So Scott County would be about right here. And so this will start on its own. Again, the blue is more wet area. The red or warm colors are more dry area. And you really won't see a difference until we get to the last couple of decades. So you can really see how southeast Minnesota has really become more wet. And this line here, this whole area has had more moisture. So I just thought some of these tools are really interesting to see how over time the climate has really changed in Minnesota. And I have one more chart I would like to share here. And I need to move this. I can here. Am I still sharing the chart?
Yep.
Okay. So this is showing the average winter daily minimum temperatures, and what we see through this is that most of Minnesota's observed warming has been over the winter months. So over the entire period of record dating back to January of 1895, the average daily low temperatures have risen at more than twice the rate of the average daily high temperatures. And so Minnesota's winter season, December through February, has warmed 2 to 3 times faster than summer months, which would be considered June through August. So the last few decades have been the warmest winters on record. And you can see this trend line here is showing that there's almost about a half a degree Fahrenheit increase in winter temperature per decade. So the frequencies that we would see of like a negative 35 degree Fahrenheit readings in northern Minnesota, or the kind of average negative 25 degree Fahrenheit readings in southern Minnesota, have fallen by up to 90%. So in other words, we don't get as cold as we once did. And even though Minnesota, we always see periodic severe cold spells, the long-term decline in cold extremes is believed by scientists to continue. There is one more thing I did find on the DNR's state climatology site, some facts that they put together about what they've seen through precipitation and temperature through the 126-year record. And I just wanted to read some of those to you. Starting with precipitation, there's a 20% increase in the number of 1-inch rains. There's a 65% increase in the number of 3-inch rains, and a 13% increase in the size of the heaviest rainfall of the year. So since the year 2000, widespread rains of more than 6 inches are 4 times more frequent than the previous 3 decades. As far as temperature, some of the facts they've put out there are our night temperatures have warmed 55% faster than our day temperatures since 1970. The average temperatures in Minnesota have warmed by nearly 3 degrees Fahrenheit since 1895, since the period of 126 years. The 10 warmest and wettest years on record have all occurred in the past 20 years. So our Minnesota climate is becoming warmer and wetter. And the last thing I wanted to share with you about that is that I also found on their website that there's about 5 DNR staff that shared some of their observations that they've been seeing in their professional and their personal lives. So one of the habitat managers talked about that ice fishing season is becoming shorter. Typically ice out is occurring at least in some areas 1 week earlier than it did, back in like the 1940s. One of the fisheries staff had said that they have projections that walleye will fade from smaller, warmer lakes as higher temperatures lead to a loss in walleye reproduction, and that the warmer conditions are causing largemouth bass populations to thrive. One of the nature guides said that she believes that the warmer weather has made northern Minnesota more hospitable to deer, which she believes is to the detriment of the native moose populations. I don't know if you've heard over the years, sometimes the news has reported, a decline in the moose population in the wild. She said that it's been several decades that she's seen any native moose in the wild. One of the regional DNR directors is also, in his personal life, a maple syruper. And he said that the warmer winters and the earlier springs have changed typical sap running, the sap running time from mid-March, and it's now occurring sometimes in early February or even late January, which is a full 6 weeks earlier than what his grandfather did 50 years ago for maple syruping. And lastly, one of the forestry managers was comparing old photos of tamarack forests to the same areas today, and said that within a few years, that same area is just brown. So we're losing tamarack forests from the changing climate.
So it's all for us, when you guys, those are all really sobering thoughts, but good to know. When you think about how that applies to the work that we do, which is obviously one of the points of this, is that for us, day-to-day work, like things you might not think about when we do repairs of our capital projects, or cities or townships do repairs of their stormwater projects. A lot of the large construction resource work for us occurs in the winter month, because the ground is frozen and there's less impact on the resources, less erosion. You're better able to get down there. Well, that window gets smaller and smaller and smaller for us. So for the ability for us to install these projects and manage these projects and maintain these resource projects without having larger detrimental impacts becomes harder and harder. And the cost goes up because we have to start running into warmer weather and warmer winter. You need more mud mats and things like that, so on and so forth. So it's kind of one of those, how does that affect us on a day-to-day? Another kind of interesting thing for us too is that when we get a lot of warm winter precipitation that's melting and running off because we don't have the ability to absorb it into the soil simply because the ground is still frozen, we're losing that from the watershed, and it's all going downstream, versus it being snowpack that slowly melts in the spring with the ground thaw. It then soaks in, but instead because the ground's frozen, when a lot of this is running downstream now because of those warmer temperatures and the ground still being frozen, we're losing a lot of that. And it's also causing more flooding issues. It's why you see a lot of resource areas and issues of storage, right? We need to be able to store a lot of this water now that we didn't used to need to be able to necessarily store at the time that we expected to be stored. So those are some of those kind of day-to-day impacts. And it affects the way that we think about the planning, and it affects our costs, and it affects our budgets. And it's just something to keep in mind as we continue to move forward and ensure that we're doing the best job that we can. How can we continue to do things better? How can we continue to keep improving and protecting our resources and doing the work that we do? So it's just one of the things that we keep track of. So Melissa, great work. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that information, Melissa. It is kind of shocking to see it, especially in some of that time lapse stuff. Really gives a good impact. Really impactful to see it that way. So, Other questions or comments from Melissa or Vanessa?
Madam Chair, this is Virgil. Yeah, Melissa, thank you. Excellent job and presentation. And I think it's very clear that our tendencies are getting warmer and more precipitation. And as I think about how that affects us and our organization, the big thing that strikes me is that we're having more of these large events in terms of precipitation. And what that implies is that as we try to do stream stabilization on Sand Creek, that's sort of putting a Band-Aid on the problem. The real problem is when we get these major events, more precipitation than the stream bank can handle. And that's where we're getting the major erosion. So I think it challenges us to always be thinking about, rather than just Band-Aid, fixing problems, how do we keep more water upstream and minimize the extreme flows downstream? So that's just something we have to think about as we move forward. Thank you.
It's a good point, Commissioner Pint. Thank you. Another benefit to being able to maintain some of that is we have extremes in both directions. We get all of our water at once and then it gets really dry. And during those heavy drought conditions, if we're able to store more water on the land upstream, we can release that back into the system. And so it's less stress on the system at those dry times as well. So there's a benefit on both ends of those extremes that we're experiencing if we can store more water on the land all year round. So yeah, very good point. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right, Melissa, I think you get to wrap it up with watercraft inspections presentation.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I just put together a few slides. I did put the full report in your packet so you can read that at your leisure. So I'll just go really quickly through some of the highlights of the report. So again, this is our third year doing watercraft inspections and having waterfront restorations perform those for us. We had inspections on Thole, O'Dowd, McMahon, and Cedar Lake at 2 accesses on Cedar. In 2021, there was a total of 4,355 inspections that were completed between all 5 launches, with 1,400 inspection hours. We were able to start a little bit earlier this year since we had a contract in place. So they started inspections on May 22nd and they ended on September 25th. As you can see, Cedar, the large access at Cedar tends to be the most active and the busiest, with O'Dowd Lake following not too far behind. I always think this is interesting to see what some of the busiest weekends and holidays are. So we're looking at all lakes over the inspection and season weekend. And again, the 4th of July seems to be the busiest weekend. The number of inspections compared to the number of inspection hours is pretty up there. It's interesting that early June was pretty busy too. People must have been excited about getting out on the lakes, and then you can see it really drops off in late September. I always like to look at what times were the busiest, because then that helps us determine if we need to switch some inspection hours around. But again, this has been pretty consistent over the last 3 years that the time frame of 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. is really the busiest. The weekends are the busiest time for inspections. But we did have them pick up some additional hours on a few other days of the week. I also forgot to mention that the DNR did not have staff or funding to allocate any inspection time to any of these lakes this year. The only time that they allocated inspection time to was on Prior Lake, and that's because it's a priority because of the zebra mussels. So all of the inspections that were completed on these lakes were done solely by waterfront restorations and no DNR hours. So during the entering inspection, when somebody comes to the access, the inspector will ask a series of questions and look for certain things. And so what we're seeing still typically is that the violations seem to be people coming to the access with plants already on their boat or their trailers that are removable by hand. We did have one boat show up at Cedar Lake that the inspector found zebra muzzles that were removable by hand, so they didn't require them to decon. And there's still a few people showing up at the accesses with the plugs in when they arrive, and the plugs are supposed to be out. So there was 3 drain plug violations, and I have a comparison I'll show you of that, which is right here. So what's the good thing is that we are seeing a decline in drain plug violations from 2019 through 2021, which is good. We seem to have an increasing trend of plants, people coming to the access with plants stuck on their equipment. So we might have to think about some different kind of educational targeting to make people more aware of that, and hopefully we can bring those numbers down as well. And just as a reminder, that zebra muzzle boater that did show up at the access, we did have the county sheriff deputy go talk to that boater and just educate them on making sure their boat is clean when they show up at the access, and they were not given any kind of citation. The exiting inspections, again, are mostly plants. I do like to look at this just to make sure nothing is coming out of the lake that we don't know is in there. So this is pretty typical, and this has been the same from the last 3 years. This is mostly plants that we're finding people coming out of the lake with. I always find this interesting is one of the questions that the inspector asks is, what lake were you last on? And then Waterfront also looks up that lake in color codes what the invasive species is in that lake that the people were last on. So I think this is kind of helpful that if we ever do find a new infestation in the lake, we might have an idea of where it came from. But and I always kind of like to look at what kind of watercraft are we seeing going on the lakes. We did have some wakeboard boats, which I was interested in seeing if we did, and those were mostly launched on O'Dowd Lake. So there were 7 wakeboard boats launched on O'Dowd. My note here is that the 7 wakeboard boats really account for 0.48% just on O'Dowd Lake. And in the report, each of these graphs gets broken down per lake. And so on the O'Dowd graph, it's showing as 0% were wakeboard boats, when really it's just that they rounded up to a whole number. So instead of putting 0.48%, they rounded it to 0, but there was really 7 boats that launched on O'Dowd. And just in summary, we're still having boaters thank the inspectors for being there and for doing the inspections. We haven't really had any inspectors that had to deal with boaters that were uncooperative. Staffing, though, was a challenge in 2021, and I know a lot of businesses experienced that they're just having a hard time getting staff on. So they were able to have 2 inspectors that have been doing this for the last couple of years come back, but it took a little bit of time to hire the additional 7. So that's why when they made up the hours during the season, they asked if they could put people on a couple different days of the week to just get some coverage during the week. And I thought that was good, just to see if we needed to, focus on other days of the week, but we're still finding that the weekends are the busiest. So that's all I had, just to show you some of the highlights. And if you have any questions, the full report is in your packet. If you ever have any questions about some of the information in there, just feel free to let me know, and I'd be happy to answer those. So that's all I have. I'll stand for any questions if you have any.
Thanks, Melissa. Any questions for Melissa? Okay, hearing none, I think we can wrap up. Do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting tonight?
This is Commissioner Casilius. I'll make a motion to close tonight's meeting.
And do we have a second?
Commissioner Beerling, I'll second that.
I was wondering if everybody just wanted to stay. Not that I don't love seeing you, because I totally do. But I don't know about you, but I'm getting a little hungry for dinner. Commissioner Weaver,
Aye.
Commissioner Pint,
Aye.
Commissioner Casilius.
Aye.
Looks like we lost Commissioner Phil, Commissioner Schmidt,
Aye.
and Commissioner Veerling.
Aye.
Thank you,
Alright.
commissioners, for being here and for all your input and all of your thoughts. And thank you for taking the time out of your day.
Thanks. Great meeting.
Thanks, everybody. See you next month.
Okay, everyone. Well, nice job.
You can